at Oliver Bernard. So yeah, thanks for joining us this evening. We've got Sufyan with us tonight, who is going to take us through his experiences on gaining confidence with test automation and how you can do that yourself as well. There will be time for questions at the end, so if everybody can remain on mute and just put any questions through to Slido. So those that have been with us the last couple of weeks will have used that with us. I'll pop it in the Zoom chat function now, but if you go onto slido.com or slide.do or do and put in the code A402, and then we'll answer your questions at the end. But yeah, over to you, Sufyan.
Thanks, Ash. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone who's already here with us just after 6 o'clock here in the UK. Really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedule. I would say you could be doing 101 other things, but because of the coronavirus, maybe tens of other things you could have been doing this evening, but instead you decided to take time out of your schedules to be here and join me and join QA in London to be a part of this presentation. And I appreciate that. Is there anybody here, just off the top, that's attended my other presentations at all? I see a few familiar faces. Some people I've asked to join me tonight, and I appreciate you guys doing that. But is there anyone that has seen my other presentations? If you have, this is kind of a disclaimer. There's some of the material that's similar. So if you find that being the case, just want to forewarn you that some of it may look very similar to some of the other presentations I'm giving. However, we're looking at it tonight from a slightly different lens. We're looking at test automation through the lens of trying to establish confidence. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first thing we need to understand and we need to agree on is kind of a definition for what we mean when we talk about confidence. So I did a simple Google search, and this is Google's definition of confidence. When you talk about confidence, you're really saying that you want to feel or believe that you can have faith and rely on someone or something. So in the case of test automation, you want to be able to believe and have faith that when you run your automation suite at all levels, that you can rely on it to give you positive results. And what does positive results mean? Positive results means that your tests are not flaky, number one, and number two, that when they do fail, that they are revealing real bugs, real defects, real issues, and they're not just failing and giving you false information. You want to have the confidence that the information is accurate, and you want to have confidence that when you run your tests, that you can have faith that your application is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So what I want to give you today is a tool that you can hopefully use to help you gain further confidence in your test automation strategy by telling you a little bit about what I've been trying to do. I'm coming at this with just over 15 years of experience in the QA industry. I started back in 2004, coming straight out of uni and falling into, as many people do, into QA. And over the years, obviously, automation has taken a bigger and bigger role in that journey. Whereas initially, back in the early 2000s, automation was kind of the icing on the cake of testing. Now, automation is more and more becoming an integral part of the cake itself. And you can't really get by without some level of automation. I'm not of the belief that automation is going to solve all your issues or that automation can replace a manual tester. I believe there will always be room for manual testers. And I have confidence that the QA industry will adapt and we will one day hopefully understand how automation and manual exploratory testing can work hand in hand. So coming back to the topic at hand, there's two important aspects when it comes to test automation. As QA, we tend to think about confidence more than our friends in development or in other areas of the business even. And when we think about confidence, we ask three things. Number one, can we give confidence or assurance to our team that something has been tested thoroughly and that it works? Number two, can we be confident that if something fails, we will be notified via failing test? Also, confidence in our tests that there is no flakiness. And three, can we be confident that our end users, so this is probably the most important, that our end users, because at the end of the day, we're building these products for our end users. We're building these products for customers, and those customers can be internal or external. And when we're talking about testing and confidence, at the end of the day, what we want to always keep in mind is who's going to be using this product, and is this going to make their lives better? Is this going to make their user experience better? Is this going to make them have more confidence in the software that they're using so that they're more likely to come back to our company when they have other software needs or demands? Will we be the first people, one of the first few companies that they think about when they need software for whatever industry that is? So it's always about thinking about the end users and giving them confidence as well. And we use test automation to help deliver that confidence on all of these fronts. Developers, on the other hand, tend to think a lot about coverage. So when you talk to a developer and you have conversations with their developers, oftentimes the way that they're approaching things is, hey, I wrote this function or these three functions and I have 100% code coverage. And what they mean there is they're essentially saying that they have a test, they've written a unit test in most cases, and they're saying that through these unit tests, each line of the function is being touched. So if every line of those three functions is being touched, they're going to tell you, yep, I have 100% code coverage. But the counter argument to coverage is you can have 100% coverage, but you don't really know if it's good coverage or bad coverage. I can write three tests that call these functions, but don't really do anything. So while coverage is a good first step, to take coverage to the next level, you need to have confidence. So confidence and coverage are two key elements when you're thinking about your test automation strategy, and you need to think about them both. However, developers, like I said, will often think about the coverage aspect. So where you come in as QA is really thinking about confidence and establishing the confidence. So coming to my journey, I joined Housey. Housey is a prop tech. We're in the property technology industry, mainly dealing with property rentals and lettings. And we're trying to make renting a property in the UK as easy as it is to rent a hotel room or to rent on Airbnb. So that's kind of our mission at Housey. That's what we want to try to do. I joined Housey in June of 2019 as the QA lead, and really the primary and only QA at the time. 2 days after I joined, we hired our first QA actually in the Philippines to try to replicate what we're doing here in the UK. The UK is the hub, and we have office in the Philippines, to replicate what we're doing in the Philippines. And it was really important to get somebody to kind of mirror what we're doing in the UK in the Philippines as well from a quality perspective, because we had developers both in the UK and the Philippines, but we had no QA. So the first step, like I mentioned at the top, I am a believer that automation is becoming more and more of an integral part. However, I never see it actually fully replacing manual testing and the need for manual and exploratory testing. But I knew that test automation would be something that I needed to bring in at Housey. As our company grows, as we get bigger, we're going to have to rely on automation for some of our core functionality, some of our regression testing. And while it won't replace the manual side, it needs to play a part in it. So the first step in that was really about finding a tool that I could use and that would scale with the business. And this was actually quite challenging, but it was my first real challenge to figure out what tool I wanted to use. Now, when you look out there in the marketplace, there's hundreds of tools that you can go to. And to make a choice, I needed to have some set of criteria. And to define that criteria was even difficult. I didn't really know what I actually wanted, but I knew what I didn't want. And so I started there. The things that I knew I didn't want. On top of that list, so here was the list that I put together, was that I didn't want to use Selenium. Why? What do I have against Selenium? Selenium's great. I have nothing against it from a technical perspective. In fact, many organizations and companies that I've been at in the past have used Selenium. However, every time that I've gone to configure Selenium, set up Selenium, try to get it up and running on my own, it's a total nightmare. Makes me want to scream and pull my hair out. So by using Selenium or by trying to use Selenium, it wouldn't get me off to a confident start in my automation journey. So I knew that I didn't want to use Selenium. I also knew that I wanted something quick and easy to set up. So this helped me narrow down my focus and get to a point where, I was looking at maybe a handful of tools that are out there. And lastly, I wanted something quick and easy that I can start using right away, and I can be confident and I can be up and running and spending my time learning and writing automation scripts instead of configuring and figuring out the nuances of the tool and getting it set up like I would be with Selenium. I wanted something I could install right away and I could start writing scripts and I could do a POC, proof of concept, and get it up and running. So the tool that we ended up going with was Cypress. So Cypress has gained a lot of popularity in the recent years. And I believe the reason why it's become so popular is because it is just that. It gets us out of the Selenium ecosystem, because so many other tools rely so heavily on Selenium. It's very quick and easy. It was actually started by a developer to give developers a quick and easy way to get up and running and start writing unit tests. So with that, coming from that background, that's why it is so quick and easy to set up, because the person and the people that started this Cypress tool were trying to solve that same problem. They didn't want to deal with the headaches of Selenium. They wanted something quick and easy. They wanted something that they could start using right away. So Housey started their journey with Cypress. However, just having a tool doesn't give us confidence. How can I gain confidence in my test automation strategy? And this was now the next step in, after the tool selection, in how can I be confident that I'm automating the right thing? That was the next kind of hurdle. I wanted to start automating, but how do I decide what I automate? Because at the end of the day, whatever I decide to automate, I want to make sure I'm automating the right thing so that, again, we can go back to giving our end users confidence, giving ourselves the confidence when we run these automation tests that they're working properly. And again, The answer was initially, I don't know. And quite a few things come to mind. However, when I encounter situations like this, I always believe, like I did with the tool selection, to kind of draw on your past experiences. Then the voice in your head goes, well, I want to do it right. I don't just want to automate for the sake of automating. And this is a mistake that I've seen many organizations make. One company I've worked for, the CIO was gung-ho about automation, and they made this huge purchase of, back in the day, it was HP Quality Center. And they bought this great tool, spent thousands and thousands of dollars on it. And then they said, the CIO came in and said, okay, this is the silver bullet. That was mistake number one. This is the silver bullet. We want to automate everything. And I knew back then, and from that point up until now, my hypothesis is the same, that that's probably not the best approach. So I was conflicted about, what do I automate? Do I automate random stuff? I mean, you could just pick and choose what you want to automate. You could go down the route of that CIO that I referenced, and thinking it's a silver bullet and just try to say we're going to automate everything. Or there's other organizations that I've been at where what we decided to do was, a bug would occur in production, and we would take that bug, we would triage it, we would go through some criteria and decide whether or not, what's the likelihood of this bug reoccurring, how severe is the bug, and analyze it from that perspective. And if it met a certain threshold, like if it was pretty severe, like maybe a P2 or a P1, and it was likely to occur often, then we would go ahead and we would automate it. So we would squash that bug. Basically, we'd put a script in place so that that bug would never occur again. And if it did occur again, we would have this automation suite that would tell us that this bug has come up again, hopefully before we actually deployed it to production. So these were the things that I started asking, like, how do I decide what I want to do? For the POC, I went with pick some random stuff, and it works for a POC great, right? It's a proof of concept. You just want to make sure your tool works. I wanted to make sure Cypress worked. I wanted to make sure that, that I could write a test and get it up and running. So I took two things from a sprint that we were working with, that we were working on at the time, and I decided to automate those two things. And that worked phenomenally well for the POC. At this sprint review, I was able to show the team, hey, we've got this tool, we've started a POC, we automated these two scenarios, and this seems like we're on the right track and it's the way to go. But doing what I did for the POC probably isn't the best way to scale a test automation strategy. So with that being said, what do I have in my, what I like to call my toolbox? So here's my toolbox, and there were three things that stuck out when I was thinking about my test automation strategy. Number one was the testing pyramid. So most of you guys, I'm assuming, are all pretty familiar with the testing pyramid, and I'll show it here in a little bit. But that was the first thing that I had that I thought I could leverage and I could use. Number two, at Housey, I was very, very fortunate to join a company where the devs were already writing unit tests. And this made me smile when I joined Housey, to understand and know that my developers already, to some level, understand the value of testing and they already understand that when they write a piece of code that they need to write something to test that code to make sure it works, or even better, they need to write the test first and then get the failing test to pass, aka TDD. That would be phenomenal. But as a starting point, they were already writing unit tests, so that was great to see and made me smile. And lastly, I had this thing called Agile Scrum, which again is something we're probably all familiar with. And is there something in Agile Scrum that I can leverage? Because I always believe it's better to work smarter, not harder. So you don't want to go back and recreate the wheel. And we live in a day and an age where we have this history to draw on. And if you don't have a long career yet in QA, there's always resources out there. And coming to this meetup tonight is one such example, right? But there's always resources that you can go to kind of gain that experience and that knowledge that you need. So in my case, I look back at Agile Scrum, which I've been using for years, and thinking, is there anything in Agile Scrum that I can maybe leverage as I'm pushing out my test automation strategy and trying to develop my strategy? So I started with the first two. I started with the testing pyramid and the devs already writing unit tests. So let's start with the testing pyramid. Here we have it. Now I'm assuming most of us in this group have seen this before in some shape or form. There's some controversy around it, around if it's comprehensive enough. And the founder, or the person that drew up this pyramid, Mike Cohen, when he initially published this idea or this concept, he really left it subject to interpretation. And what the testing pyramid tells us is that you have your unit tests at the bottom, which are very wide and extensive, covering the application. So going back to what I said at the top, where I talked about coverage being really important from a developer mindset, we're looking at the most coverage possible. So it's going wide, and you're trying to cover as much of the code as you possibly can. Ideally, 100% coverage is what developers often aim for. Then on top of that, you have the service level. And the service level is not as wide as the unit tests, but is pretty close and is really looking at things like the API calls. So this is where developers kind of start traversing the pyramid, going upward, and they may or may not be also writing service level tests. But this is where QA kind of takes over. And in this service level layer, QA also gets involved in oftentimes writing service level tests. And on top of that, you have the UI tests. Now, UI tests, what the pyramid tells us is that UI tests should be less than service tests because it's not as wide. And it should definitely be less than the unit tests. And there's very, very good reasons for that. I mean, the most common reason is that UI tests tend to be a little bit more flakier than API or unit level tests. So you want to keep UI tests as lean as possible and have as much coverage as you can at the service and unit level. One thing that my boss, my current boss, told me and taught me when I was discussing kind of my automation strategy was, what we want to try to do at Housey is, yeah, we want to keep the UI tests lean and small and robust and avoid flakiness where possible. But one of the things he said is, whenever you write a UI test, Sufyan, think about how can we take this UI test and maybe break that UI test into multiple service tests. And then we can retire the UI tests because we have the coverage at the service level. And then can we get the developers to think about at the service level, how can we take this service level test, an API test, for example, and is there any way that we can break that service level test down into 2 or 3 unit level tests and possibly retire those service level tests? Because the lower down on the pyramid you are, the less flaky the tests will be in often cases. So very rarely do unit tests fail. And comparing that to service and UI tests, it's a lot less. So it makes a lot of sense what my boss told me, in that, is there a way to push the test down the pyramid so we can get more coverage and more confidence with the service and unit level tests, and also build our confidence in our test suite as well. So this was something that I kept in mind as I developed my test automation strategy and approach as well. So what we had here was developers working up the pyramid and QA now working down the pyramid. So developers are going from the unit level up into the service level, and then that's where QA kind of meets them halfway, and we have QA writing some level of service tests, but primarily focusing on the UI tests is where QA kind of, that's the core piece of QA work. So for the developers, it's pretty clear what they have to automate, right? They write a function and then they write a unit test to hit that function and test that function. And it's pretty straightforward. It's a one-to-one relationship. But as you move up the pyramid doesn't tell me, like what to automate and what not to automate. All it tells me is that the UI test should be a lot lighter than the unit and service level tests. So there's still a big question mark at the top of the pyramid, whereas at the bottom of the pyramid, it's very clear. So I wanted to keep the devs writing unit tests, but because the UI level is smaller than service and unit level, what this did kind of answer for me is that I don't want to automate every scenario. Otherwise, we would have what some organizations have in an upside down pyramid. You would have an ice cream cone, and you would have the UI tests looking like the unit tests, and the unit tests looking like the UI tests. So it'd be, if you just turn this on its head, it would literally look like an ice cream cone. And that's not what we want. So I was able to, by analyzing the testing pyramid, know and eliminate the idea that I definitely do not want to automate every single scenario. And then also keeping in mind what my boss told me is trying to push these tests down the pyramid. I was able to, through process of elimination, eliminate this avenue for my test automation strategy. So I knew that. So keeping all that in mind, I want to tell you guys a little story now, a personal story. So this is my daughter. My daughter's name is Isa. And a few years ago, when she was in nursery, she came out of school one day, and my wife goes to pick up the kids normally when they used to go to school. Nowadays, even going to school is like a novelty, right? Currently, my kids are at home doing homeschooling, as are so many other kids. But back in the day, when she actually went to school and did her work at school, she came out one day and her teacher came out with her. My wife was there to pick her up. And my wife approached the door to pick up my daughter. And the teacher said, Isa's mom, can you stick around for a bit? I wanna have a word with you. So the other parents filtered out, and my wife was there, and the teacher was, my wife was concerned, and she said she was thinking maybe Isa's done something wrong. Maybe Isa had an accident. Maybe she hit somebody, God forbid. And she asked the teacher, like, what's going on? And the teacher's like, actually, can you come in? And now my wife is like, literally like okay, something serious has happened here. The teacher's not only wanting to talk to me, but is calling me into the classroom. And so my wife proceeds to go in the classroom, and obviously my daughter's there, and my daughter's now with her mom. Isa's with her mom and the teacher. And the teacher says, follow me, come with me. And they go to this table. And on this table is this contraption that my daughter's holding in her hands. And the table's filled with other contraptions, not quite like this, but you see loo rolls glued onto boxes and straws and different things put together, right? Like kids have been doing the different projects of assembling stuff. And so my teacher says, here's what Isa made today. And you can see the contraption there. And my wife says, oh, okay, that's nice. What is it? And then the teacher asks Isa and says, Isa, can you tell your mom what you made today in school? And Isa says, basically what happens is you have water and you take the water and the water comes in from this loo roll and you pour the water in here and it goes down into this first box, and the first box does some stuff to the water. It cleans the water, and then it goes down to the second box, and then it gets cleaned some more. And then after it's all clean, it comes out through this straw, and then I can drink the clean water. And what my daughter had done here at 3 years old was essentially she had designed a water filtration system. And this is why the teacher called my wife in to show her this. He said to my wife, she said, normally 3-year-old children, the reason we have them do this activity is because we want them to get used to putting stuff together, gluing stuff together, assembling things. But there's no expectation of a child at 3 to be able to think about the use for this contraption. It's just about putting stuff together. So I'm not giving this example to brag about my daughter, that she's anything special. But in this case, she went above and beyond what was asked or what was expected of her. And the teacher had called my wife in, not to reprimand my daughter or to tell my wife that she had done anything wrong, but rather that she had the ability to think about this water filtration system at her young age. And that was quite impressive. So it was really a pat on the back for my wife and for my daughter, who had come up with this. And the teacher just wanted to share that with us. So my reason in sharing this story with you is because it really inspired me to think about, if my daughter can come up with a water filtration system at the age of 3, using her little experience in the world, could I use the testing pyramid as a filtration system? It's an interesting concept, right? What would this look like? If we were to use the testing pyramid as a filtration system, and if I can use this filtration system to kind of help me in mapping out my test automation strategy, then that would be pretty cool. So you would have your dirty water going into the pyramid, and we'll define in a second here what the dirty water is. But you'd have dirty water coming into the pyramid, and then some magic would happen inside, right? So these are like the boxes that my daughter was using to clean the water. And then from the other side of the pyramid, out comes your clean water. And we'll also define what that clean water is as well. But I flipped the pyramid on its side and I said, can I do something here with this? Can I use the testing pyramid as a filtration system? But before we filter out stuff, I need to understand what my dirty water is, right? I know what my clean water is. My clean water is basically understanding what I would need to automate at the UI level. That's really what I want to get. That is the answer that I want, because I'm responsible primarily as a QA lead, and my team is responsible for automating primarily at the UI level, and then helping automate at the service level as well. Developers are mainly responsible for unit level, although there's nothing wrong with, and something we do at Housey is oftentimes I try to get involved with the developers and at the very least reviewing their unit tests and having them walk me through them. Because we as quality people are responsible not just for quality at the UI level, not just quality at the service level. We are responsible for the quality of the product as a whole. And in doing so, that means we have to be somewhat accountable for the level of unit testing that's being done. And amazing things happen when you start talking to your developers and you start looking at their unit tests and you start having discussions with them around their unit tests. So it's really, really important to understand that while in this filtration system, my purpose is to get the clean water, to get an understanding of what tests I need to automate at the UI level. It's also important to realize that we need to be involved at the other aspects as well. But coming back to the dirty water, what is the dirty water? So the dirty water in this case is the critical paths. So before filtering, we start with the critical paths. And it's important to define a critical path for your company. So we all have a common definition of what a critical path is. And it's pretty standard. I mean, it doesn't change much. You ask person at company X and person at company Y what a critical path is, they will probably say similar things. But I think it's really important as a team at your company, not just the QA team, but the developers, the PMs, the POs, anyone else who's involved. I mean, even educating the business on critical paths, I think can play a huge role in bringing everybody together and bringing everybody onto the same page and understanding everything. So it's important as a company to come up with your definition of a critical path. What is a critical path to you? What is a critical path to your team? What is a critical path to your company? So what we did at Housey is QA drafted a definition for a critical path, and it's a fairly long one, and you don't need to read the whole thing, but read the highlighted stuff in light blue there. And even more importantly, the stuff that's now underlined in bold as well. It's functionality that's performed by the end user to execute the most essential core activities of the system. That was essentially what we defined as the critical path. So we share this definition of critical path with the team so that everybody now understands what a critical path is. And when we start putting things through the filtration system, we all have an agreement on what the critical paths are based on this definition. So coming back to the toolbox, so the third thing that we wanted to use from the toolbox that I'd outlined at the top was Agile Scrum. What is there in Agile Scrum that could be leveraged, that could be used, that could be utilized? So Agile Scrum, or Agile in particular, is about bringing people together and having conversations, right? Any aspect of Agile that you look at, they always stress, I'm going to use maybe not the best way to describe it because it's wrong. Agile doesn't mean no documentation, but oftentimes what you hear people say is that Agile is light on documentation and the focus is more on having a discussion. I also wanted to incorporate the discussion aspect of Agile Scrum into getting people on board with how we're going to proceed with test automation and how we're going to draw out that strategy. So what in Agile Scrum brings people together? the idea of the three amigos is something that is really, really popular. And I've used it in other areas in having these three amigos sessions to, for example, flesh out requirements. So could I use three amigos session for helping me not only filter using the pyramid as a filter and having that discussion around that, but also to help me in identifying critical paths? And indeed, you can. So using a three amigos type session, we set out to use the pyramid as a filter. So we have our critical paths now coming in to the pyramid from the bottom, and you push them through the pyramid. They get cleaned or filtered out. And then when you get to the UI level, you should have a clean, easy path on exactly what you need to write tests for at the UI level. How do you fulfill your obligation as QA to make sure that you are automating the right thing at the UI level, keeping in mind the service level and the unit level. So with that, let's go through a quick example here. Clear the board, and we start with our critical paths, and we have our developers in the room, and we have QA in the room, and we have our PMs in the room, and we may or may not have the business in the room as well. So first and foremost, we are going to look at these 6 critical paths and figure out what the priorities are on these, which ones are most important, and kind of put a priority in them, just so that we're tackling the most important critical paths first. And then if we have time, we go to the other critical paths. But in this example, let's say we've identified 6 critical paths. And the first thing would be to review these. So QA would probably come into the meeting with a list of, these are the critical paths that we have identified. And then after we've done that, we go to the unit level. And depending on where you have this session, you may or may not have already started, developers may or may not have already started programming and building the application, in which case they may have already written some unit tests, or it could be at the very onset of the project, and you may not have any tests written right now, but it's a good time to plan what unit tests you would want to have. And the questions you would need to ask here are, do we have enough coverage? So what we discussed earlier on is coverage is important, and we need to make sure we have the coverage, and we need to make sure it's good coverage, not just coverage, but good coverage. And asking on each of these critical paths at the unit test level, do we have enough coverage, is an important question to ask. And then having the developers kind of talk you through what unit tests they wrote, how they implemented those unit tests, or what unit tests do they plan to write. If they don't have any plan to write unit tests, that's a perfect opportunity for you as QA to be like, okay, show me your functions, ask them to talk you through the functions and explain kind of how the system is going to work. And then from that, you ask the question of, would it not be a good idea to maybe write a test for this function so that we know that it's working right? Or another way to ask that question is, if this piece of code breaks at any point, maybe developer on the other side of the floor has to build on this feature later on. And if they write some code that breaks this, when they go to deploy to the test environment, or when they go to deploy to any environment for that matter, will this test break and tell me that I need to fix something, right? In that case, it would be revealing a real defect. And those are the type of discussions you want to have when you're going through this process, so that you can hopefully eliminate that ever happening, so that that developer goes back and realizes that there is enough, that I do need to add unit tests here to the point where I feel like we have enough coverage. And again, based on that example, what you're really asking as well is, do you have enough confidence? Are you confident enough that if developer on the other side of the floor writes another function later on that interacts with this function and potentially breaks this function, that your test is going to fail to reveal that something's broken. That's what you want. You want the confidence. So from these 6 critical paths, we go through these questions: enough coverage, enough confidence. And what we have decided in this example is that critical path 1 and critical path 4 probably have enough coverage and enough confidence at the unit test level. So this may not be the case all the time, but sometimes what you can even do is you can make the decision that because we have the confidence in the unit test for these, we don't need to maybe focus in on these critical paths at the service level or at the UI level. So we can almost put a full stop there on critical paths 1 and 4 and say we don't need to talk about them anymore when we're talking about service level tests or UI tests. Does this always work? No. Oftentimes what you will find is that you always need a little bit of service level testing as well, especially when it comes to integration of different components of your system. So the last question you want to ask before you leave the unit level is, can we add more unit test coverage? And if the answer is no, very well, we bring them over to the service level. And again, we kind of go through the same process. The same questions are asked here. Enough coverage at the service level for these 4 critical paths that we've brought in? And do we have enough confidence? So we're asking the same questions again. And lastly, can we add any more? So in this case, in our example here, once we got to the service level, we had a discussion on those 4 critical paths, and we realized that 3 of those critical paths, in combination with the coverage we have at the unit level and the coverage we have at the service level, we can pretty much say that we are confident that if anything breaks in these 3 critical path areas, that we will know that breakage before we deploy. And we can basically say we have enough coverage there, which leaves us with one critical path left to automate at the UI level. So what we've essentially done here is we have established for ourselves as QAs a clear path, a clear road to what we need to automate. We need to automate the remaining critical paths that are revealed to us through this filtration system. We probably should still, as we all know, automate the end-to-end happy paths. And then these 2 things in combination will give us confidence that we have the right level of automation at the right point in the pyramid, and that we are automating the right things when it comes to our end-to-end, when it comes to our critical paths. So hopefully that helps you guys in your endeavor to draw out a strategy, or gives you a new way to think about the testing pyramid. Because as I said, Mike Cohen put this out there and a lot of people critique it, but I believe that, there's value in everything what am I trying to say? There's value in everything, in all models that are put out there. Mike Cohen, for example, is considered an industry expert when it comes to product management and whatnot. And he also has done quite a lot of work in QA. So I have the confidence in what he put out there that it's probably good enough for us to be able to take benefit from. Now, there are some people out there that just put out random stuff and don't have any backing behind it. But when it comes to people that are well known in the industry, you can have the confidence that the models that they put out there are probably usable in some way, shape, or form. And it's up to us to understand and realize how we can put these models into use. So this is just one way that you can practically use the testing pyramid to help you do just that. So I want to end by giving you a little bit more on this whole process and the way we approached it at Housey. So we have discussed how to use this pyramid and how to use it as a filtration system. But oftentimes what people struggle with is, how do I document all this? I mean, I've been to many, many meetups where I've been presented with these great ideas, and you go back to your company and you start wanting to do stuff with it. You take what you learned from this session, for example, but you may struggle with how to document it. How do I put this on paper? What's a practical way to implement this? Is really what would be helpful. Well, that's at least what I would find helpful from a lot of the presentations that I've been to. So I want to share with you how you can document these results and how we do it at Housie. We started by simply doing it as a bulleted list. Just a simple bullet list. So we would take critical path 1, scenario 1 in this case, that does something. And then underneath each bullet point, we would write notes. We would write that this has some unit test coverage, needs API coverage, and then only needs Happy Path UI. And if you have even 10, 12, 15, 20 scenarios like this, the bulleted list gets kind of long-winded and it gets very hard to understand and digest. But it was a good start. So iteration 1 of implementing this system or this model, we went with a bulleted list. But I quickly realized that this wasn't going to work well for us. Because as we get into more complex applications and systems, we're going to have more than 5 or 6 critical paths. And not only are these sessions going to get longer, but on top of that, I don't want to have pages and pages and pages of documentation to have to read through or go through to understand it. And then if I want to share this with stakeholders, or if I want to share this with even my developers, I want them to be able to find the information that they need quickly. So this approach wasn't going to work. So again, going back to my toolbox, I took something out of the toolbox that I was using elsewhere. And you guys may be familiar with the RAG system. RAG stands for red, amber, green. It's basically the traffic light model. So what we ended up doing was I created a sheet, a spreadsheet of sorts. And at the top there is the key for the sheet. And then on this table, we would list out our critical paths, and we would fill in the columns at each level. So U is for unit, S is for service, V is for visual or UI tests. And we would basically represent if it has enough coverage, if it needs coverage, or if it doesn't have any coverage. It may have some coverage, which would be amber, and then if it needs coverage still, then it would be red. So here we have critical path 1, and in this case, we're saying it has enough. We have enough coverage, and we have enough confidence at the unit level, hence why it's green. We move on to the service level. We're saying it has enough at the unit level, like we said, but it needs some more work at the service level. So we have some confidence in coverage at the service level, but we need more. So it's represented by a yellow light. And I'm also putting in comments there to kind of explain what that means. And then lastly, we have red under the visual or the UI test level, which is basically telling me that we need to do some work here. We don't have any coverage currently. We need to add some. So what you get then is something that looks more like this. Now, this is a lot more easier to digest and understand than a long bulleted list. And this is kind of how we've ended up documenting our critical paths and taking the 3 Amigos session that we're doing for this filtration through the pyramid and documenting our results. And what you see here for critical path 2, it's gray on the visual. So that basically represents that we don't need any UI tests. And then critical path 3, in this case, through the discussion that we had, we realized that critical path 3 doesn't actually meet our definition of critical path or is actually not a critical path. So therefore, we just eliminated it and we didn't even worry about it. So I'm hoping that combining this idea on how to document along with the model that I presented will allow you to take something back that you can not only implement, but you can also use as a starting point to come up with your test automation strategy and approach so that you can gain more confidence in your test automation. So the key takeaways for this evening are: number one, leverage your toolbox. And I did that by leveraging the developers already writing unit tests, the testing pyramid, and using 3 Amigos. I used the testing pyramid as a practical tool. So in this case, I used it as a filtration system for my critical paths. And then I want to, lastly, make the outcomes easy to read and digest. And I did that through the RAGs table. And really bullet point 2 there is what helps me to gain confidence. With that, thank you very much for listening, and we can open it up for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Sufyan. I'm just going to pull up the Slido tab now to see if we've got any questions come in. Bear with me one moment. Okay, so we've got a couple on there at the minute. So if anyone has got any questions, if you look in the Zoom chat function, there is the code for Slido there, so feel free to log on and ask any questions. First one though, Sufyan, what's the best CI to use with Cypress?
Best CI. CI meaning continuous integration, I'm assuming. That's a good question. And I don't know if I have the right answer. I can give you an answer. I can tell you what we're using at Housey. But whether that's best or not, I mean, to be honest, it's been one of our struggles, and it's been a hurdle that we're still trying to get over to, develop our test automation strategy and to build a solid deploy pipeline. At Housey, we are using Circle CI to integrate all of our stuff, or that's our continuous integration platform. I've used Jenkins in the past. Which one's better? I honestly couldn't say. I think they all kind of have their nuances. So I wouldn't be comfortable telling you that Circle is the best CI to go with, but it's the one that I'm using currently. And like I said, we're having some issues getting that up and running. I mean, we have tests running there. Where we're running into issues is with whitelisting IPs, because we're using AWS to spin up our instances, and they have a range of IPs, so we're running into issues there. And we also run into some hiccups when it comes to authentication and getting that configured in Circle CI. So those are that would be some of my advice, but is it the best? I don't know. Hopefully that helps.
Perfect. Okay, let's move on to the next one here. So is it best practice to run the automated test scripts locally?
That's a good question. Is it best practice? Probably. I mean, I guess it depends where you're coming from. If you're just looking to, if you don't have, let me put it this way. If we all want to get to a point, the whole reason we're automating tests is so that we don't have to push the buttons, right? And at the end of the day, that's the time we're trying to save. So if we're having to run automated tests manually, it almost is counterintuitive. However, I do think that running your automated tests locally is not a bad idea while you're getting your automation pipeline and your deployment pipeline set up in an order. So for example, right now, currently at Housey, we have some tests that do run in our automated deployment pipeline whenever we deploy to an environment. So we have our internal tools tested every time we deploy to the test environment. And then any customer facing tools, we have those tests run every time we deploy to the staging environment. And then we have a group of tests that we haven't quite got because of the hiccups that I've mentioned previously with integrating them, that we haven't quite got running in our automated pipeline yet. So those tests, we do run them locally. So we've set up a schedule, myself and my counterpart in the Philippines, we've set up a schedule and we've given responsibilities on the tests that we're supposed to be running locally as part of our automation suite every day. So we run it locally on our environment, on our machine, but we hit the environments that they would be tested with in the automated pipeline. So for example, those internal tools, I would run those locally against my test environment, and I would run the customer facing products locally against my staging environment. So is it good to run them locally? I would say that's probably not the end goal, but it's definitely a step in the right direction to get you to where you want to go. Hopefully that answered the question. If not, feel free to ask another one.
Perfect. Moving on from there, did you use any tools for understanding test coverage, unit tests and end-to-end tests?
Yeah, so we are not yet at the point of having that large number of UI tests where we have to use any tools to really understand our level of coverage. And we're doing that intentionally. We're trying to keep it lean and small so that we don't run into issues of flakiness. And we're doing our due diligence. That's kind of the benefit of coming into an organization at the very beginning, at the outset, being able to establish that. At the unit test level, the developers do have some tools. And unfortunately, I don't know the exact name of the tool, but it basically gives you what they call a crap score. And it's a really bad name, but it basically, crap score tells you the level of coverage that you have. So the developers do use that tool to kind of measure their level of coverage, and they try to keep that as close to 100% as possible. So yes, we do use tools. And if you have a larger suite of automated tests, those tools are probably helpful. But where I'm at right now, I think for UI tests, we probably won't need to use a tool yet. If we ever get to the point where we have 200 UI tests, I'm probably going to be asking myself why we have 200 UI tests. Do we need 200 UI tests? Can we push them down the pyramid? And then at that point, if we still need a tool to give us visibility on coverage, then maybe we would look at that.
Okay, excellent. And has this approach you're using slowed down deliveries, i.e. delivering less per sprint? How did you manage to convince stakeholders it's a better approach?
That's another excellent question. Has it slowed down our delivery? No, I don't think it has. I think it's actually allowed us to be able to have a clear understanding of what needs to be done. And developers are already in the code, so they're already writing code anyway. So to write a unit test isn't going to take too much more time to do. Now, depending on where you implement this process and approach, if you're thinking of it from doing it in the same sprint and having like developers code and write tests and having this process and then having UI tests all in the same sprint, I think if you did it in that case, it probably would maybe slow down the delivery because you're trying to do it in the same sprint. But if you kind of stagger it, and that's the approach we've kind of taken. So before we even bring it into a sprint, before even in like a refinement, if you were to do this session as a supplement to a refinement session, you're doing it before you even bring it into a sprint. So it's not going to impact your sprint from that angle. And if you do it later on, which is where we kind of started. So we had a product that was literally done and then we ran it through this model. And in hindsight, that was probably a little bit late in the game. But if you do it then, again, it's at that point, it's just kind of a final checkoff to make sure that you've hit all the areas that you needed to test, and to make sure that you can have the confidence in your tests at the unit, service, and UI level. So my advice would be to do it before it even gets pulled into a sprint, while you're in the discovery mode of your project. That's probably where it fits best. And if you do it at that point, it doesn't affect your sprint.
Excellent. I think we've got one last one here. So in the filtration system, explain why or how would any critical paths not have unit tests, as every critical path will have underlying code, front end or back end?
Yeah, so there should be very little reason why something shouldn't have unit tests. Is it possible to keep the question up, Ash, until I've answered?
Yeah, sorry, apologies.
Yeah, so it's probably, I forgot the question.
It's in the Zoom chat as well, if you quickly open that. Apologies.
If I stop sharing now and open the chat. Explain how you, the unit test not having critical path. Yeah, any critical path not having unit tests. So most unit tests would have most critical paths should have unit tests. And if they don't, I would be asking a lot of questions, as you've asked this question. But I have encountered issues where the developers have justified, and again, it goes back to conversations, right? Having the conversation with the developer and understanding the value of the unit test. And there have been situations where we felt as a group, and we've decided as a group, that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a unit test, but it may make more sense to have a API test. And this is kind of also counterintuitive to what my boss told me, right? Because he's telling me to push things down the pyramid. And what we realized, and I've gone back to my boss with this feedback, is that sometimes it just doesn't make sense. So it's maybe a bad example, but I'll give it anyway. If a developer is just putting a button on the screen, and that button's already been, the functionality behind that button's already been tested elsewhere, then you probably don't need another unit test for that button, because you're just adding that same functionality somewhere else in the system. So you wouldn't repeat the same unit test again. So that would be one case where you wouldn't necessarily have a unit test for that implementation of that button, but only because it's covered elsewhere. And other things like that may come up where you have a discussion with the developers. And that's why it's so important to use Agile Scrum philosophy of having discussions, talking to your developers, understanding where they're coming from, and really actually opening up the code and looking at it together and having the developer walk you through. And through that process, you can understand kind of their philosophy and their mindset, and ask them the question. I mean, why can't we have a unit test on this if there is something like that? And if they give you a good enough answer, then you can have the confidence and accept that answer, rather than leaving it to them to decide whether or not they put in a unit test and you not asking the question. So ask the questions like you did here on if something doesn't have a unit test, do raise that in these meetings. Hope that answered it.
Perfect. We've just had a couple more come in whilst answering that one. So how do I get an automation test strategy documented? What should I include?
How do you get an automation test strategy documented, and what should you include? You would document it really, I mean, it really just starts with, I'm guessing you're starting from like a blank sheet of paper and you're just wondering where to start. If that's the case, similar to where I was, it's really, again, it goes back to discussions. You draft something up, maybe come up with a few bullet points. You do some research on how other places have done it. There's a lot of material out there. You come to meetups like this, and get information from other people. It really just starts with an idea. So whatever ideas you have, the first thing is to get them down on paper, show them to a few people, show them to your developers, show them to your fellow QAs, show them to your boss, get their input on it, and figure out what works for you. More and more companies are moving away from the old school traditional having a 20-page strategy document. So I would say, unless you're working at a company that's still a bit behind and still following like a waterfall approach, you're probably not going to have a 20-page automation strategy document. It's probably best to get some ideas and guidelines on paper, present them to some people, polish them up, and maybe put them on your shared. We use Google Drive. Other companies use Confluence. Maybe put up a page on Confluence and just have your strategy outline there. And it could be as long or as short as you need it to be. But with this whole agile approach and having more conversations, it's really about just putting out guidelines and then having the team adopt those guidelines and then following the process. And a model like this, like the pyramid, turned on its side and using it as a filtration system is, again, just putting it on paper, putting together some slides, making a presentation, getting everybody bought in, and then putting that document somewhere, whether that be on Confluence or on Google Docs. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, perfect. And if we just close off with one more, because obviously we're running on a little bit with time now. So just coming up to this one. So how do you identify which tests to add to the regression pack?
How do you identify which tests to add to the regression pack? There's different approaches and philosophies here. So the traditional approach would be anything that you automate, if it's running in a reasonable amount of time, then you could add it to your regression pack. I mean, that's really the value of automation, is when it comes to regression testing. So if you spent the time to automate something, and if you followed the approach outlined by the testing pyramid, and you're heavy on unit tests, and you have service level tests, and you have some UI tests, I don't see why all of those couldn't be added to your regression pack. I mean, that is the value of automation. If your tests are taking too long to run and they're going to hinder your deployment pipeline, then that's something separate that you probably need to address and get them running faster. So for our UI tests, so one thing that the dev lead actually told me very early on is, as we start integrating UI tests into our pipeline, we need to be wary of the feedback loop. So we don't want these tests to take hours or days to run. We want them to run probably within, at the most, 15 minutes. If half an hour is even stretching it. So that's something that we're keeping in mind. So if anything takes longer than the 15 minutes or half an hour, then we probably will rework that test, get its performance up, meaning the time that it takes to run, down. And once you have that, then there's really no reason to add it to the regression pack. Because again, at the end of the day, the reason we're automating is so that we can run these tests on the click of a button and get the feedback when we need it. And if you've spent time automating something, it's worth running that test as much as possible. And if you're automating just for a one-time run, then it really goes back to asking, was that test really worth automating? You're only going to automate something that you have to run over and over again. And what do we typically want to run over and over again? It goes back to the critical paths. We want to run the critical paths over and over again. So those are the paths that we typically want to automate or make sure we've automated. And then those are the paths that we probably also want to add to our regression pack. And if you allow me here, Ash, just to answer this last question around defect management.
No worries.
How would defect management fit into this strategy or critical path? So if you're doing the right thing on critical paths, if you're identifying the critical paths right, then your defects should go down. If your defects continue to go up, then I would reevaluate critical paths. to make sure that those critical paths are sufficient. And maybe part of your definition of a critical path can be to analyze P1 and P2 defects and then plug that in to your definition of what a critical path is. I see critical path and defect management really, really closely linked. And theoretically, it should be an inverse relationship. So the more critical path coverage you have, you should see a decline in your defects. Cool.
Excellent. Well, no, thank you very much for that, Sufyan. Excellent talk there, and some good questions at the end as well. So thank you everybody that joined us this evening and asked those questions. As always, if there's any further questions after this, feel free to reach out to myself or Sufyan directly. We'll obviously share the video of tonight's event and the slides with you in the morning. And yeah, if there's any other topics that you'd like to hear, or if there's any talks that you may like to give, feel free to reach out and we can go from there. But thanks all, have a nice evening, and stay safe.